My talk is the immigration invasion and hidden agenda behind open borders. Why is the Bush administration, many members of Congress, most presidential candidates, and others pushing so hard for a massive guest worker amnesty program, which they call comprehensive immigration reform? Why are thousands of foreigners allowed to illegally cross our southern border every day, including today and tonight, and remain in our country? Why won't the federal government enforce already existing immigration laws and build the more than 700 miles of double-layered fencing along our southern border that Congress approved and President Bush signed into law last October? Why are thousands of illegal aliens allowed to march in our streets waving Mexican flags and making demands? Why were Border Patrol agents Ramos and Campion sent to prison earlier this year for 12 years for simply doing their jobs, while the illegal alien drug smuggler was given full immunity to testify against them? Why is the Bush administration pushing so hard to allow 100 Mexican trucking companies, I'm not talking about 100 trucks, I'm talking about 100 trucking companies, which should be thousands of trucks, full access to U.S. highways? Why has the administration repeatedly told us since 9/11, which was 6 years and 1 month ago, that we're in a war on terror? They tell us every hour, don't they? War on terror. Yet they have allowed millions of people from Mexico and other countries to illegally cross our borders or remain here after their visas have expired. Why does the federal government allow sanctuary policies protecting illegal aliens, including violent criminals, in cities across the United States, even though those policies are against federal law? To really understand what's going on, we need to go back to 1965. I was riding my skateboard in the San Fernando Valley and body surfing at Malibu. I wasn't paying attention to politics. But that's when Congress amended the Immigration and Nationality Act and opened the door to mass immigration. And just very briefly, between 1925 and 1965, we had reasonable legal immigration into the country. 185,000, 200,000 people per year on average. And during that 40-year span, we created the greatest middle class the world has ever known. And people had a chance to assimilate because they came into the country in rather moderate numbers. Well, that changed in 1965. Quotas based on national origin were eliminated, and family reunification, or chain migration, was introduced. This bill discriminated against low fertility nations in favor of the more overpopulated, high fertility third world countries. Senator Ted Kennedy, yes, he was a senator 40-some years ago, pushed the bill through the Senate. And he reassured his colleagues in the nation with the following words, quote, "The bill will not flood our cities with immigrants. It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society. It will not relax the standards of admission, and it will not cause American workers to lose their jobs." I'll ask you a rhetorical question. Was this simply congressional ignorance, or is Congress lying to cover a long-term scheme designed to dismantle the American middle class, lower our wages, and divide our national culture? This is one of the longest, wordiest slides I'm going to show you. I want to read something that Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, wrote in 1968 in the John Birch Society Bulletin. He said, quote, "Another integral part of the Insiders program has been the promotion of crime and the coddling of criminals. This is the very essence of the central purpose to destroy civilization in general and the American forefront of that civilization in particular. Among the purposes of this total campaign is adding to the atmosphere of revolution all around us and to a feeling of fear, frustration, despair, and resignation among the American people." Don't you feel that way? Isn't that the way you've been feeling lately? He continues on. To To help in this conversion of the American scene into a holocaust by crime and treason, the insiders needed more criminals and more communists than they could produce fast enough out of native-born Americans. An early part of the plan, therefore, was to bring in these needed reinforcements in two ways. A, by breaking down our immigration laws through changes, circumvention, and loopholes, and B, by a continuous stream of entries without any pretense of legality, unquote. And he wrote that 39 years ago. That same year, 1968, the Ford Foundation, which you may know is a leftist, very wealthy, tax-exempt foundation, founded two organizations that had to have a tremendously negative impact on our country and are partly responsible for blocking these laws that cities are trying to pass to crack down on illegal immigration. The Ford Foundation founded the National Council of La Raza, which means the race, and the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which is also known as MALDEF. And the Ford Foundation created these groups to create a Hispanic nation within America, using both legal immigrants and illegal aliens. La Raza's first president was Maclovio Barraza, an identified member of the Communist Party. In 1968, which is when that 1965 Immigration Act took effect, started this massive legal and illegal immigration into our country. You probably don't know it, and I am going to touch on legal immigration for a little bit. Our Congress happily accepts 1.3 million legal immigrants into our country every year. Remember I told you between 1925 and 1965 it was around 200,000. In 1970, our nation's population stood at 200 million people. It now stands at over 300 million. That's 100 million in 35 years, most of it due to massive illegal and legal immigration and the children to both groups. A number of years later, in 1984, President Reagan sounded a dire warning. He said, quote, "The simple truth is that we've lost control of our own borders, and no nation can do that and survive," unquote. However, 2 years later, instead of enforcing or upholding our U.S. Constitution and deporting the illegal aliens, and when I say upholding our Constitution, I'm talking about Article 4, Section 4, which states that the United States should protect each state from invasion. Instead of doing that, Congress and Reagan rewarded about 3 million illegal aliens, mostly Mexicans, with amnesty and a path to citizenship. This bill included employer sanctions to discourage more illegal immigration. And amnesty was sold as a never-to-be-repeated action. Once again, our friend Ted Kennedy, that same year, 1986, he said, "We will secure the borders henceforth. We will never again bring forward another amnesty bill like this," unquote. But amnesty was an incentive for more illegal immigration, which is obviously just common sense. And the employer sanctions were never enforced, so the illegal alien invasion continued into our country. In 1990, Congress and the first President Bush passed another Immigration Act. This one increased legal immigration by several hundred thousand people per year. Several hundred thousand people per year. First President Bush was president from 1988 to 1992. And in numerous venues, he stated his goal for a new world order. And I remember seeing that. He was addressing a joint session of Congress. It was either 1990 or 1991. In fact, you can see it on YouTube on the internet. And I was watching it on TV 15-some years ago, watching him talk about or mention the New World Order. And being naive and ignorant as I was, I wondered, what is that? But it caught my attention. He didn't even explain it, of course, to the national television audience. Well, the phrase New World Order has been used for generations by individuals seeking to control the world through socialism, step by step in a deceptive and gradual process. The first President Bush introduced the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA. Bush and others told us that NAFTA would stimulate commerce, spur job creation, and curb illegal immigration. (1993). This is when President Clinton signed NAFTA. There he is, joining the U.S. with the socialist governments of Canada and Mexico in a developing economic and political union. And you'll notice that I've put the words Republican and Democratic in quotation marks. And I'll explain that as we go along. NAFTA was the first major trade pact signed by the United States to bring significant immigration consequences. It set a precedent that moved our country down the path of equating so-called free trade with not only the free flow of goods across borders, but also people. The next year, in 1994, in my state of California, we passed by an overwhelming margin of 60 to 40%, Proposition 187. How many of you have heard of Proposition 187? There are a few of you, okay. Overwhelmingly passed, okay? This historic measure would have denied most social services to illegal aliens and eliminated a magnet for people to enter California illegally. I write about Prop 187 in my book in several chapters, specifically in my chapter titled Barber-Co. Barber-Co was raised on a Sioux Indian reservation. She is a great American patriot. And in the mid-1980s, as I write in my book, she was working as a manager in the Anaheim Police Department. Anaheim is where Disneyland is located. And she was discovering that the majority of the crimes in that area of Orange County were being committed by illegal aliens, primarily from Mexico. And she told her superiors about this, and they said, don't talk to us about that. Just go back and do your job. And she said, well, I am doing my job. Well, she was fired. And a few years later, in 1992, she founded her organization, the California Coalition for Immigration Reform. And it's interesting, when she founded it in 92, she said, until the U.S. controls immigration, all else is a moot point, as it will no longer matter, unquote. And I started my chapter about her with that quote. A few years later, in 1997, Mexican President Zedillo declared at a meeting of the National Council of La Raza in Chicago. Remember I told you about the National Council of La Raza, founded in 1968 by the Ford Foundation? Speaking in Chicago, he said, quote, I have proudly affirmed that the Mexican nation extends beyond the territory enclosed by its borders, and that Mexican migrants are a very important part of it, unquote. And that is on CD, by the way. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Just last month, the new Mexican president, Calderon, addressed the Mexican Congress, and he said that Mexico doesn't end at its border. In 1999, California Governor Gray Davis, maybe some of you have heard of him, killed Proposition 187 that we passed overwhelmingly by a 60 to 40% margin in the state of California. He killed it in a backroom deal with Mexican President Zedillo, the California Latino Caucus, and the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which was founded by the Ford Foundation. See, I told you La Raza and MALDEF are playing an integral role in the destruction of America. But it's Ford Foundation and others that are financing them. Governor Gray Davis in California, that same year, 1999, speaking to a Hispanic audience in Los Angeles, said, quote, and this is important, in the near future, people will look upon California and Mexico as one magnificent region, unquote. few years later, in 2003, Californians began an effort to recall Governor Gray Davis. In October of that year, Governor Davis was recalled from office in a special election just 2 months after he signed a bill granting driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Okay, isn't it nice that I'm talking to a New York State audience? That's a hint. We were very angry with that man for killing Prop 97. Very angry. And when he signed the bill to give driver's licenses to illegals, we said, that's it. Now, dozens of people ran in the special election. I write about this in another chapter of my book titled Joe Gazzardi. He's another citizen activist who ran for governor in that special election, one of many people. And unfortunately, Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected. He was not my choice. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a globalist. He is a socialist. But what was interesting was that as soon as he was elected and in office in October, that driver's license bill was quickly repealed because of massive grassroots pressure. And it wasn't because of Schwarzenegger, it was because of the American people in California. It was because of pressure. And I know because I was covering it extensively. And that proves to us that we can make a difference. In January of 2004, President Bush, our current president, announced at the White House his so-called guest worker program. Okay? This was in January 2004. I was writing my book at the time, and this was a ceremony in the White House. I was watching it on C-SPAN, and guess who got invited to this speech? The National Council of La Raza and the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Colorado Congressman Tom Tancredo was not invited. In December of 2004, at the end of that year, after Bush had made this announcement about his guest worker program, which of course is an amnesty, but he didn't call it that, there was an immigration conference outside Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And one of the speakers was T.J. Bonner, who is president of the National Border Patrol Council. And he said, today, as we sit here and every other day, 10,000 illegal aliens will cross our border. 10,000 a day. He said the United States Border Patrol will catch about 3,000 of those people. We are in the midst of an unprecedented crisis, unquote. 10,000. Have you heard that on the evening news? Have you read that in your local newspaper? Now we're going to look at a bunch of pictures. I hope you can see this. This is a picture taken in 2004 near the Arizona-Mexico border using night vision photography. You see this line? Those are people coming in from Mexico. Dozens of them. Now, there are people outside the frame here, but I have been down to the Arizona-Mexico border. I interviewed all of the people that are in my book. I interviewed them in person. I spent 2 years researching and writing the book. And I spent several days on the Arizona-Mexico border. This is a common sight coming into our country, day and night. A common sight. And I was given a tour by a couple of people that I write about in my book. One was Chris Simcox, who helped to found the Minutemen, and the other one was Glenn Spencer, who I write about in my book. And Chris, we had a gun and a bulletproof vest, and I didn't. I wondered why that was going on. But I'm watching out for the rattlesnakes and the tarantulas, and he was taking me to these little places where the illegal aliens would hide out and wait for the time when they could come into the country. And the trash that I saw, and I took pictures of it, but I didn't put them into this presentation, was just something I couldn't believe. All kinds of drugs, syringes, women's underwear, trash piled, and this is true, this high. Not in one place, but many places. This is an invasion. This is not illegal immigration. This is certainly not immigration. This is a massive foreign invasion to our country. And I would like to know, where is the U.S. Department of Defense? Department of Defense? Where is that? Where are those guys? Here is a very recent picture taken in June 1st of this year by American Border Patrol and Glenn Spencer, a great American patriot. You will see there are 13 illegal aliens here. I hope you can see this. Fleeing from this one Border Patrol agent. I have an arrow pointed to him. Okay? This is not atypical. This is typical. And as I pointed out to you in that quote from T.J. Bonner, the head of the Border Patrol, a couple of slides ago, he said, the Border Patrol only catches, a few thousand of the 10,000 that are coming in. And you can see this is a perfect example of what he was talking about. Our Border Patrol, brave Border Patrol officers are outnumbered, and the federal government really prevents them as best they can from doing their jobs, which is why they sent Ramos and Campion to prison, to send a signal to the other Border Patrol agents. If you do your job, this might happen to you. In January of 2005, the Wall Street investment firm Bear Stearns published a report, which I wrote about in my book. In fact, just about everything I'm telling you is in my book, most of it. And this report by Bear Stearns said that there are 20 million illegal aliens in our country, holding 12 to 15 million jobs, as employers replace American workers with lower wage illegal labor subsidized by you and me. Us. And you should understand that this is not cheap labor. It's cheap to the corporate executives who are buying a third and a fourth mansion, and another jet, another yacht, another mistress. But it's not cheap for us. We pay for it in education, health care, prison costs. Just to give you a personal example, because I'm mad as hell about this. 3 years ago, in fact, it was just after I'd come back from my tour on the Arizona-Mexico border, I had a 7-millimeter kidney stone. And anybody who has kidney stones, it's not a lot of fun. And I was in such pain that I told my wife, Diane, take me to the emergency room. Now, I spend about $350 a month for health insurance out of my pocket through Kaiser Permanente. And we drove down the hill to the closest Kaiser Permanente emergency room in Harbor City, which is an illegal alien community, basically. It was midnight, and I'm really in pain, okay? I'm crying. And we get up to the counter, and I told them, I've got a kidney stone. I need some help here. And they said, well, we don't have any doctors right now, and no beds. So it's going to be a couple of hours. So we turned around and we sat in the waiting room at midnight on a weeknight. And guess what language was being spoken in the waiting room? Spanish. By everyone in the waiting room. And it looked like they had just come across the border. And here are my wife and I, and I'm in excruciating pain. I've had kidney stones before. This was the worst. And I'm spending all this money every month for health insurance. And I had to wait. Now, I'm not special. Maybe some of you have had similar experiences. But this is what's going on here. So we are subsidizing this labor. It's not cheap. This congressional report, titled "A Line in the Sand, Confronting the Threat at the Southwest Border," was released to the public in October of last year. That day that it was released, I printed it off my computer, and I spoke to the congressman who released it, Congressman McCall of Texas, 3 days later on the phone. This report says that in 2005, this is a quote from this congressional report, and I should point out this is a House of Representatives Homeland Security Subcommittee. Homeland Security. Quote, in 2005, as many as 4 million to 10 million illegal aliens crossed into the United States. Did you hear me? 4 million to 10 million in 1 year. The Border Patrol caught in that year 1.2 million out of that number, the bigger number, including 650 from special interest countries, in other words, countries that sponsor terrorism. Now, if you do the math, if 4 to 10 million crossed in, and the Border Patrol only caught 1.2 million, including 650 possible terrorists, well, that means that thousands actually made it into the country. Thousands of terrorists, possible terrorists. Right. But I thought we were in a war on terror. I thought Sean Hannity's great commander-in-chief, President Bush, was fighting a war on terror. What does that say? Does that say we are fighting a war on terror? The report says, quote, members of Hezbollah have already entered the United States across the southwest border, unquote. Hezbollah, a number of years ago, was labeled by the U.S. State Department as a terrorist organization out of Lebanon. Now, if you watch the evening newscasts, you'll see them, the anchormen, these anchormen, they're geniuses, you know, and the anchorwomen. I worked in the TV business for a few years. They talk about Hezbollah in the Middle East. Do they not? They talk about Hezbollah. Did you ever hear the anchormen and women tell you about this, that Hezbollah has already crossed our southwestern border in the United States? No, you did not. And of course, no surprise, drugs are pouring in across our southwest border. This report says in the year 2005, up to 80 million pounds of cocaine and marijuana came in. Up to 80 million pounds. You remember in the 1960s, those of you who were around then, President Johnson, his war on poverty, and then President Reagan's war on drugs. Come on, what nonsense. Now we got the war on terror. This congressional report, again, Homeland Security, House of Representatives Homeland Security Subcommittee report. It's astounding. And after this report came out, I wanted to find out which media organizations are going to report it to the American people. I wanted to find out. And what I found out was the day that this was released, the Houston Chronicle, which sometimes does a good job and reports the truth, they actually had that number, 4 million to 10 million. They actually published that, and I was astounded but happy. For the next couple of weeks, I researched on the internet which print and broadcast and cable public media outlets reported on this. Virtually none. Virtually none. The so-called mainstream media, which I write about extensively in my book since I was in the media for a number of years, is not mainstream. It's controlled by corporate media cartels. Very quickly, in the mid-1980s, for example, there were 55 large corporations that ran most of the media outlets in America. And I'm talking everything from movies to book publishing, television, radio, newspapers, and magazines. Today, there are 5 large multinational corporations running most of the media outlets in America. That is a monopoly and a cartel, which is why we're not getting the truth. And thank God for the internet and some radio talk show hosts that are willing to have me on and a few others who do tell the truth. But you tell your friends about that, and you can get this report off the internet. Just go to Google and Google in a line in the sand, print it out, share it with your friends. Sean Hannity didn't tell you about that. Rush Limbaugh didn't tell you about that. Michael Medved didn't tell you about that, and a host of others. This report also includes some very startling photos. And I'm going to show you one. You know, when they talk about, well, gee, they're coming in by the trainload, Well, guess what? They are. You can see this. I made all these pictures really large. There's a photo from this line in the sand. Scores of people, and these are just the ones we can see, riding on railroad cars from Central America and Mexico en route to our country. And you didn't see this on the evening news. Katie Couric didn't tell you about this.
Katie Couric doesn't have a clue.
I'm being facetious. Now, of course, the people who are invading our country illegally are not coming here just to steal jobs away from Americans. Law enforcement reports that at least 10% are murderers, rapists, pedophiles, drug smugglers, thieves, and gang members. At least 10%. And I showed you the previous figures. You can extrapolate it and figure it out for yourself. Let's just use T.J. Bonner, the Border Patrol guy. Let's just use his number that 10,000 are coming in every day. 3,000 are apprehended. That means 7,000 make it into America every day and are probably still here. Now, if law enforcement says that 10%, at least 10%, are already known criminals, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and so forth and so on, that means 700 every day. Any surprise why we are hearing about growing gang crime across our country? Is it any surprise? And of course, there's no Ellis Island down on the border. Many illegal aliens and legal immigrants, because the legal immigrants are coming in large numbers, as I told you, have diseases such as tuberculosis.
Oh, yeah.
On May 18th of this year, the Seattle Times, which is certainly no conservative newspaper, reported that tuberculosis cases have doubled in King County, Washington in the past year because of foreign-born residents. Now, I'll tell you something. If a liberal newspaper like the Seattle Times is willing to publish that, you know it's a lot worse. You hear about all these food recalls and E. coli bacteria. Well, we know why this is happening. Illegal aliens are working in our restaurants, working in our schools, working just about any place. They go to the same bathrooms that we do when we go to these restaurants, folks. I'm going to share with you some statistics from my state of California and across the United States. Then we're going to talk about the traitors in our country. In the year 2004, Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca said that there were 100,000 gang members in Los Angeles County alone. Okay? 100,000. Now, if a government official is willing to say 100,000, that tells me there are 150,000 or more. That is equal to the size of our military force in Iraq. Okay? And most of them are illegal aliens. Most warrants for murder in Los Angeles and many other cities across our country are for illegal aliens. That is a fact. About 30% of all prison inmates in California and across the United States are illegal aliens. Congressman Steve King of Iowa estimates that 12 Americans are murdered by illegal aliens every day in our country. He says another 13 are killed by drunk illegal alien drivers every day in our country. In January of this year, the U.S. Justice Department reported that in 2004, illegal aliens who were arrested for crimes were rearrested as many as 6 times. Oh, but we're told we don't need a fence, right? Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger said, we don't need a fence. Now here's one. I always use it at all speaking engagements because this one really blew me away. When I read it in the Los Angeles Times, believe it or not, in the LA Times and the LA Daily News, this was, I guess, 3 years ago, more than 53% of people in LA County over the age of 16 can barely read, write, or speak English. Now, I want to tell you something. As I said when I opened my talk, it was nice to be back in America driving around here today, and it was. This is a beautiful area. If we don't stop this invasion, this is going to come to your communities. No question about it. 160 schools are being built in Los Angeles at a cost of more than $15 billion to taxpayers. The majority of kids are illegal aliens and the children of illegals, and they don't graduate. When the riots start again, they're going to start in Los Angeles, and you heard me tell you that. Hospitals and emergency rooms are going bankrupt and closing in California and across our country. Hundreds of thousands of babies are born to illegal alien mothers every year in America, and these babies are granted instant U.S. citizenship and welfare benefits. Now, this is a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution ratified in 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War. And it wasn't for illegal aliens, it was for black Americans who have been treated horribly in the past in our country. And this is disgraceful. That these people coming across and giving birth, that these babies are automatic U.S. citizens. Total misinterpretation of the U.S. Constitution, and this has to change now. This is really serious. This is one of the more serious components of this invasion. We are told, you'll hear the Hillary Clintons and others, the other candidates, tell us that there are 47 million people who don't have health insurance in our country, so we must provide universal health care. Well, what Hillary and the others don't tell you, what the media doesn't tell you, is that up to half are illegal aliens. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Now, we shouldn't have universal health care even if we didn't have the illegals, but up to half are illegal aliens. Now we're going to talk about the Reconquista, reconquering the American Southwest, really reconquering the whole country. This is a booklet titled Reconquista, the Takeover of America. These are recorded statements by those who, in their own words, have vowed to control the government and your lives by the vote, if possible, or by violence, if necessary. I didn't include that in the quote. This booklet was created by the California Coalition for Immigration Reform, and I really urge you to go to ccir.net, and you can hear some incredible words from these people who I call Reconquistas. And they include elected officials in our country, university professors, and others. I didn't bring my CD with you to play them. They are really quite startling, but I will read one to you. This is from Henry Cisneros, who you may recall was Secretary of Housing under President Clinton and former president of Univision. Univision is one of the Spanish language TV outlets. In fact, it's headquartered a few miles from our home. And Henry Cisneros, a cabinet secretary in our government said, quote, "As goes the Latino population will go California, and as goes California will go the United States of America. We should stand for the proud Latino future. We must stand for the people, now more than ever, and then be prepared to fight." Unquote. A U.S. cabinet official said that. And you can listen to it. Go to that website I told you about. I'm going to show you a series of pictures. If you're not angry already, you should be now. On March 27th of 2006, students at a Southern California high school raised the Mexican flag over the American flag flying upside down. Where's the U.S. Department of Defense, ladies and gentlemen? Upside down, American flag. That's an act of war, I would say, in our country. Front page, Los Angeles Times. I've labeled all these particular slides here Reconquista for obvious reasons. May 27, 2006, front page LA Times photo shows LA Mayor Villaraigosa and local elementary schools kids waving Mexican flags at Los Angeles Airport where they welcome Mexican President Fox. These will be the future high schoolers who will take down the American flag, like in the previous slide, and raise the Mexican flag. On August 26th of 2006, a mob took down an American flag at the Maywood Post Office in Southern California, not too many miles from my home, stomped on it and replaced it with a Mexican flag as police looked on. See the police looking on. U.S. Post Office. Did you hear about this on the evening news? Did you read about this in the newspaper? This wasn't even a high school, it was a post office. U.S. government building. I'm going to just go off on a little tangent here and tell you about Maywood. Maywood is a very small city, a suburb of Los Angeles, very tiny. And it is virtually all illegal aliens who live there, okay? And I have participated in a number of protests, American sovereignty type protests in Southern California over the past year. And on one, we went to Maywood. When I say we, I'm talking about Americans of different skin colors. American patriots come in different skin colors, races, ethnicities, and religions. And there were probably, I guess, about 100 of us. And we went in a caravan, in cars and SUVs, to protest in the city of Maywood on their main street. We had to be escorted in by the police. Police motorcycles, police cars, escorting us in to have a protest in our country against the invasion, because we would have been viciously attacked if we hadn't had the police protection. Now, I do have some photos of this, but I didn't bring them with me. So we are the 100 of us, and we had a lot of American flags. It was actually very exciting and inspiring. We had our protest in the street. There was a barricade in front of us, and then there was another barricade down where the doors are here in this building, and the illegal aliens were behind that barricade. I kid you not. This is in our country. Behind that barricade were the Mexican flags and some very vicious-looking people. Not some, but dozens. There are about 150 riot police separating us. Sounds like the Civil War, doesn't it? Well, it wasn't just the illegals behind that barricade. There were illegals behind the barricade over here and behind another barricade behind us. We were surrounded by illegal aliens in our own country with police protection. Some of the illegals got on the roofs and threw filled water bottles at us. And we did nothing but go there with our American flags in hopes of drawing media attention. We got a little bit of media attention, but not much. A couple of the illegals were arrested because they were spitting on the police officers. A number of the teenage Latinas, who are really some of the most vicious, were giving us the finger and saying F you, F you, F you constantly. We had to be escorted out of this U.S. city by the police. But we did this for a very good reason. And if you ever get a chance to participate in something like this here in the Northeast, and you probably will eventually, do it. Because you will see up close and personal what is really going on in our country. This is National City, California. It's a suburb of San Diego. It's right near the California-Mexico border. This is the City Hall of National City, this building here. These are police up here. And these are illegals, communists, socialists, anarchists, with their Mexican flags. Riot police were called in for this. I attended this event too. This is another exciting one. And we went there. We organized this protest against the sanctuary city policy of National City. It's an illegal alien city, protected by the city government. It told us to go back to Europe. Well, I didn't come from Europe. I've been to Europe on vacation and business, but I didn't come from Europe. I came from America. I'm an American. I'm not a European. But they told us to, they came here illegally, and they told us to go back to Europe. Can you believe this is happening? This was, you can see some Mexicans burning an American flag with some others holding Mexican flags. Did I say American flag? Burning the American flag. He's draped in the Mexican flag. This was on Broadway in downtown Los Angeles. 150 American patriots of different skin colors again. I'm going to show you those different skin-colored American patriots in a minute or so. We were marching down Broadway to LA City Hall, where we were going to give, I was one of the speakers on the steps of LA City Hall. But there were about 150 of us maybe, and we were trying to get more media attention. That's the whole point of this, to get the media to report on this. There were thousands of people lining the sidewalks as we marched down the street in our own country. Thousands. There are videotapes of this probably that you can find on the internet. And these people had our guts. These are President Bush's good-hearted people. Hard-working, good-hearted people. They hate us. Not all of them, and I'm not saying that, but certainly the ones that I have seen would just as soon slit my throat if they had a chance to do so. Thousands of them, as we 150 American patriots marched down our own street in downtown LA to LA City Hall. There were 150 riot police officers, and they were on our side. They came and had refreshments with us later in the day. We're providing health insurance for these people, medical care, I should say. Medical care, education, so forth and so on. Food stamps. This photo was taken just a few weeks ago, September 30th. Mexico's National Action Party, it's a political party, held a conference at Plaza Mexico in Los Angeles to organize opposition to U.S. immigration law and to register voters.
How can they register voters?
Well, we have anarchy. Okay? Now I have arrows. This is in the United States. I have arrows pointing to 2 Mexican federale troops who were guarding this meeting. There were others. And we know this because this photo is courtesy of Save Our State, SOS, great organization in California, because a few of their members went to protest, and they took these pictures and other pictures, okay? One of the key speakers at this conference that weekend, a few weeks ago, was former President Vicente Fox. What I'm telling you is a foreign political party had a conference in our country guarded by their troops to discuss subverting our immigration laws and registering illegal aliens to vote in our elections. And Sean Hannity didn't tell you this, and I'm picking on Sean Hannity because he's one of many who refuse to have me on his show because I'll tell the truth, and he won't. Sometimes he does. Sometimes some of these talk show hosts will tell you the truth. There are some good ones, but some of the big ones, I'm going to put this whole thing together. Here's the picture I showed you earlier, the night vision photography, the illegals coming in. Here's the illegals taking down the American flag, putting up the Mexican flag, and then the American flag underneath it. And here is a picture that was in the LA Times earlier this year, taken at Phoenix Airport, of a traveler being x-rayed in order to get on an airplane. Isn't that something? And the point I'm trying to make here is the war on terror is a fraud. The war on terror is a fraud. Homeland Security is a total fraud. We are being x-rayed. I flew out here yesterday from LA, and I have to keep keep quiet because I'm so angry about this. And I took off my shoes, took off my belt, I emptied my pockets, took off my jacket, showed my ID several times to board an airplane in our country as this is going on and this is going on.
Yeah. That's right.
As our government allows a massive invasion, including terrorists and hundreds of thousands of vicious criminals, as it allows a takeover of our country, a police state is emerging in America. Since 9/11, the government and media have told us we're in a war on terror. They've passed the Patriot Act, Homeland Security was created. At our airports, as I just described, armed guards, invasive searches, ID checks, and our property is seized. So, now we're going to get to the heart of the talk here. You and millions of other Americans are asking, what is going on? What is going on in our beloved country? I'm going to show you a momentous 5-month period in 2005, most of which I write about in my book and discuss on radio shows Allow Me to Speak the Truth. I'm going to do a little bit of bouncing around, so please try to follow along. March 23rd, 2005. There was a meeting in Waco, Texas at Baylor University. Behind closed doors, President Bush, Mexican President Fox, Prime Minister Martin of Canada. They agreed to the so-called Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, which I'm going to call SPP for short. That was the morning that President Bush erased 230 years of American independence. He is a traitor. Right after this meeting, they went out and had a press conference. They talked about broad goals of improving security and prosperity. See, we're going to become more prosperous by merging with Mexico. But they provided very little detail about the partnership. It was on this day, during this press conference, that's when President Bush called the Minutemen vigilantes. So behind closed doors, he's agreeing to erase our country, and to the public he's calling us vigilantes. In fact, the Minutemen hadn't even begun their patrols yet. It was another week before they would begin their patrols on the Arizona-Mexico border. I have a whole chapter in my book on the Minutemen. There they are. Well, how do I know they're merging the countries? How do I know? 2 months later, May of 2005, the Council on Foreign Relations published this report titled Building a North American Community. The report says that Bush, Fox, and Martin, quote, committed their governments, unquote, to merging the United States, Mexico, and Canada and allowing for the free movement of people when they established the Security and Prosperity Partnership 2 months earlier. This arrow points to Robert Pastor. I will talk about him in some other slides. This Council on Foreign Relations report says the three leaders assigned working groups to fill in the details of this SPP, the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Michael Chertoff, head of Homeland Security, Carlos Gutierrez, head of the Commerce Department, Condoleezza Rice, head of Secretary of State, were appointed to head up the working groups for the United States. In other words, to manage the merger. All three of those individuals were appointed to their cabinet posts just 3 months before that Waco meeting, okay, in March. Interestingly, and I found this out a few months ago, and there's a great article on my website at fightingimmigration.anarchy.com that talks about this, and I found and put this in this article that when Bill Clinton became president and fired all U.S. attorneys in 1993, the only one not fired was Michael Chertoff, who was U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. Isn't that interesting? By the way, the Bushes and Clintons, the families, have known each other for a very long time. Many, many years. Council on Foreign Relations report calls for the, quote, establishment by the year 2010 of a North American community to enhance security, prosperity, and opportunity. The community's boundaries will be defined by a common external tariff and an outer security perimeter, unquote. And my translation of that is a common external tariff means common taxing for the three countries, and an outer security perimeter means no more U.S. borders by the year 2010. We don't have a lot of time, folks. The SPP is setting the stage for uniting the U.S., Mexico, and Canada into a single economic and political system, a North American Union modeled after the European Union. In the year 2000, speaking in London, former Soviet dictator Mikhail Gorbachev, the guy with the spot on his head, who was a communist, and still a communist, Speaking in London, he described the European Union as, quote, the new European Soviet, unquote. Does that mean that the North American Union will be the new Soviet here in this part of the world?
Very likely.
Among other radical actions, that Council on Foreign Relations report I showed you says the SPP would allow millions of illegal Mexican workers to draw billions from our Social Security Trust Fund. Now, I knew about this 3 years ago, and I put it in my book, and you may recall about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, President Bush was crisscrossing the nation, having town hall meetings and telling us that he was going to protect our Social Security money. And behind closed doors, his administration was doing this. As part of the merger, a U.S. taxpayer fund to finance tens of thousands of Mexican students to study in U.S. colleges. Boy, aren't we generous. There will be, and these are just a few samples, folks. Quote, a, quote, permanent tribunal for North American dispute resolution, unquote. That means court decisions from judges outside the United States and unaccountable to Americans. Since it was founded in 1921, the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations has been working to eliminate national identities and borders and convert America into a socialist state and then make it into a unit in a one-world socialist system. David Rockefeller, this is his book, Memoirs, came out in 2002. He's chairman emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations. He also is founder and honorary chairman of the Trilateral Commission and a member of the Bilderbergers, which is another secret group of world planners. And in this book, he admits that he and his family have been working for decades to create a world government. Page 405. For more than a century, these are his words. For more than a century, ideological extremists on either end of the political spectrum have signed upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. Well, Mr. Rockefeller, you are guilty of treason. June 23, 2005, the so-called conservative U.S. Supreme Court ruled that state and local governments could use eminent domain to take private property against the owner's will for use in private development. How many remember that? And how many were angry about it? This ruling makes it possible for the government to take millions of acres of land to build the massive NAFTA superhighway toll road system to connect Mexico, the United States, and Canada, an important step in the North American Union. And I have forgotten to put. Here is the map, and this was taken from one of the John Birch Society New American Magazine's issues. In fact, it was 1 year ago. So here is the toll road system. This is what it would look like. But actually, it won't just go vertical. There will be dozens of roads crossing horizontally across the country. This map shows travel corridors proposed by the North American Forum on Integration. This is a group of wealthy industrialists, academics, and politicians with the key players from the Council on Foreign Relations and related organizations in Mexico and Canada. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, published in 1848, calls for the abolition of private property for conversion to the state for the good of the state. So this toll road system is right out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. They're going to make our lives better by taking our roads, charging us to travel on them, and allowing terrorists, illegal aliens, drug runners to come in. Several of the other 10 planks are already in place in America, including the Federal Reserve, the income tax, and free education for all children in public schools, apparently including illegal aliens. Under the NAFTA superhighway plan, millions of containers from communist China will be brought into our country through Mexican ports. Let me just go back to that slide so we can take a look at it. Down here, communist Chinese are helping to build the ports in Mexico. We're being surrounded. Mexican dock workers, truck drivers, and train workers will be used to reduce the cost of transporting the containers into our country. And of course, now you can see why the Bush administration is pushing so hard to allow all these Mexican trucks into our country. Kansas City will be the customs office for this highway, and it'll be run by the Mexican government. Okay, how else do I know, that we know that this is true? North American International Trade Corridor Partnership in Kansas City, Missouri, May 19th to the 22nd, 2004. This was sponsored by Bayer Aspirin, by the way, and if we allow this to happen, we're all going to need several bottles of aspirin to kill the pain. Some of the words in these two documents include North American convergence, emerging North American economic system, social integration of our communities. And I have an arrow down there pointing to Robert Pastor. Remember I told you about Robert Pastor, who helped to write that CFR booklet, Building a North American Community? He's a professor at American University in Washington, D.C. Here's a more recent conference held in Denver in September, the Great Plains International Trade Corridor Conference, held in Denver last month. Officials from the U.S., Mexico, and Canada discussed a multimodal transportation corridor that will move goods and services through our Great Plains states from Mexico to Canada. But radio talk show host like Michael Medved, who's apparently on 300 stations across the country and won't have me on his show, says that this is just a figment of our imagination. He's a movie critic, by the way. He's not a journalist like I am. The NAFTA superhighways will ruin our economy and allow more terrorists, criminals, and drugs to enter our country. Here is the man I was telling you about, Robert Pastor, chief architect of the Security and Prosperity Partnership, a member of the CFR, and a David Rockefeller protege. This is a opinion piece written by him, published in the Los Angeles Times in November of last year. Build bridges, not fences. Professor at American University. The John Birch Society has documented that Pastor has been involved in Marxist activities in Latin America for many years, and that he helped to give away the Panama Canal under the Carter administration. This man is a professor at American University in Washington. He's a traitor. June 30th, 2005, the U.S. Senate approved the Central American Free Trade Agreement. I told you I was going to take you on this path through the year 2005. July 28th, 2005, the U.S. House of Representatives defeated CAFTA, defeated the Central American Free Trade Agreement, but, hold on. Hold on, that day, the House leadership broke the rules by keeping the voting open. Now, this is what they do in communist countries. Heck, why not do it here? They didn't like that vote, so Bush and Dick Cheney, who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations for many years, Condoleezza Rice, member of the Council on Foreign Relations for many years, and others from the administration drove down Pennsylvania Avenue to Capitol Hill and twisted Republican arms until they got the vote they wanted, and after midnight that night, which I wrote about in my book, CAFTA passed by 2 votes. Okay. American corporations, just a couple of months after the full Congress and Bush signed this, after the CAFTA passed, American corporations began outsourcing production to Central America. Karl Marx must be smiling. He must be smiling because speaking in 1848 to the Democratic Association of Brussels, Marx said, quote, "In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. It is in this revolutionary sense alone, gentlemen, that I vote in favor of free trade, unquote. All these free trade agreements, and you'll hear about it in the news all the time. In his Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx wrote, quote, "The communists are criticized for desiring to abolish countries and nationalities," unquote. This is the Council on Foreign Relations goal. This is their goal, right out of the Communist Manifesto. For decades, CFR members have dominated the administrations of our presidents, whether they call themselves Republicans or Democrats. In fact, Ed, who began the event this evening, he talked about that. And the John Birch Society has been documenting this for decades. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat in the White House. It makes no difference. Corporate globalism is the new world order, the destruction of the sovereign state and the creation of a world socialist government run by the super rich and their business cartels. These free trade agreements and the massive third world invasion into our country are the primary schemes used to erase our borders, middle class, American way of life, independence, and U.S. Constitution. And here is the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. I brought it with me. I'm one of the few people who have a copy. This is the 2006 report to leaders. I have the 2005 report to leaders in my home office. It's about 1 inch thick. And I worked, in the corporate world for many years. What this basically is it's a progress report on the merger. When it says report to leaders, it means to Bush and the new Prime Minister of Canada and the new President of Mexico. Here's the table of contents from this report, so you can see it for yourself. The report details progress made on the merger in the areas of transportation, energy, the environment, food and agriculture, health, law enforcement, facilitating the movement of people and goods, and other areas of our daily lives. They're integrating everything. Here is, in this report, the signature initiative, safer, faster, and more efficient border crossings. Now do you see why they have not built the fence? Now do you see why they sent those brave Border Patrol agents to prison? I've met their families, and it is disgusting of what they are doing. That they sent those men to prison for 12 years for protecting our country. It's disgraceful. It is immoral. But this is why. Because they want more efficient border crossings.
When do we supply them with the water to get through their citizens?
Since the SPP was established in March 2005, Michael Chertoff, head of Homeland Security, Carlos Gutierrez, head of the Commerce Department, Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State, have met many times with their counterparts from Mexico and Canada to plot this merger. They are leading the working groups. Here are their signatures on this report. I'm not making this stuff up. Michael Chertoff, Carlos Gutierrez, Condoleezza Rice, these are their counterparts in Mexico and Canada. While Chertoff meets behind closed doors, plotting to erase our independence and freedoms, the mainstream media show him protecting the American people. This was in the Los Angeles Times earlier this year. He's welding a piece of fence on the Arizona-Mexico border. It's, Rod Serling, who went to high school with my dad in Binghamton, by the way, he could not have dreamed this up for his Twilight Zone television show. He could not have dreamed this up. It's so bizarre. This is what the media shows us. Head of Homeland Security welding the fence behind closed doors. He's merging the countries. Here's how the LA Times covered the 2006 SPP Summit meeting in Cancun with a story and photos about President Bush visiting Mexican ruins. This was on the front page of the LA Times, okay? And here you see Fox and Bush and Martin coming down. I've actually been to this pyramid, coming down the steps Well, I later learned that that's as far as they actually walked up. This was all staged. Everything is staged. Everything is staged. That was how they covered the 2006 Security and Prosperity Partnership meeting in Cancun. The media doesn't tell us the truth about anything. And I don't even call it the liberal media. It's I don't care for these terms, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, because they mean different things to different people at different times. It's the corporate media cartel run by the Council on Foreign Relations and some billionaires. You remember the James Bond movies, especially the ones in the 60s, Dr. No and Goldfinger? Well, they already had a lot of money, but they wanted to control the world. Various conspirators who were plotting at the secret September 2006 North American Forum in Banff, Canada, under the joint chairmanship of George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State, and two former ministers of Mexico and Canada. These documents, and I'm going to show you a few, were obtained by Judicial Watch through a Freedom of Information Act request. See, you have to spend months spending money and go through all these channels in order to find out what they are planning. George Shultz, there he is. We never voted for him. He's part of the shadow government. So what really intrigued me was who attended this meeting in Banff, Canada. So I'm going to show you a list of about half of the U.S. participants. These are what I found to be the most notable names, and it is the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell address in 1961. Deborah Bolton, political advisor to the commander at U.S. Northern Command. Ron Kovas, president of the Americas Lockheed Martin Corporation. Ryan Henry, principal deputy, undersecretary of defense. Admiral Tim Keating, commander, U.S. Northern Command. Doris Meisner, senior fellow, Migration Policy Institute. Doris Meisner was the immigration chief under Bill Clinton. She's a Marxist, as all of them are, as far as I'm concerned. Mary O'Grady, where am I? Mary O'Grady, editorial board member, The Wall Street Journal. General Peter Pace, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Here's our buddy, Dr. Robert Pastor again, American University. He's everywhere. Dr. William Perry, professor at Stanford and former Secretary of Defense. As I told you, the military-industrial complex that Michael Savage talks about. Dr. James Schlesinger, former Secretary of Energy and Defense and former director of the CIA. Clay Sale, Deputy Secretary of Energy. Major General Mark Volchev, U.S. Northern Command. James Woolsey, VP Booz Allen Hamilton and former director of the CIA. This is a shadow government. What did they discuss? Here are some of the discussion topics. These are the actual words. Border crossing facilitation, economic integration, energy integration, standards and regulatory convergence. Here is an excerpt from one of the documents. Quote, we want to imagine, this is what they were talking about, Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the rest of them. We want to imagine a different North America, one in which the gap in income that separates Mexico from its northern neighbors has narrowed significantly. That doesn't mean bring the Mexican people up to our level. It means bring the American middle class down to their level. This is collectivism, Marxism, socialism. Goods and services traverse the borders smoothly, and trucks do not have to offload their cargoes at the border. Well, we already covered that earlier. Okay, that's the Mexican trucks coming in. New trade corridors have been built from northern Canada to southern Mexico. That's what these guys envision. That's the NAFTA superhighway that these talk show hosts who won't have me on their shows say doesn't exist. And labor markets are increasingly integrated with free movement of labor. That means 50 million more Mexicans will be coming here in the next couple of years. This was very recent, the third annual SPP Summit in Montebello, Canada, August 20th through the 21st. Maybe you've heard about it. Bush, Harper, and Calderon at a news conference. Excuse me. I got it. and called around a news conference in Montebello, Canada, following the 3rd Annual Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America Summit. It was held behind closed doors at a heavily guarded chateau. Here's your patriotic speaker. I'm speaking at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on August 20th, when Bush was in Montebello, Canada, okay, merging the countries. And I was invited there by the Virginia Coalition for Immigration Reform, flown out, and I gave the same address but without the slides, gave the same talk for 1 hour. And how many media showed up in the National Press Club building? 0. 0. 25 Americans, concerned Americans attended. Nobody from the media in the National Press Club building. A couple of days later, the Los Angeles Times, all the media, I just use the LA Times because I read the paper and I clip these articles out, reported that Bush, Harper, and Calderon dismissed conspiracy theories about the SPP and NAFTA superhighway. Bush dismisses talk of an EU-like bloc. Of course, I live in Los Angeles. The LA Times reporters there, they know about my book, but they didn't quote me for some reason. Oh, those are conspiracy theories. Enough of that. Let's go and talk about Paris Hilton. This merger scheme also calls for a North American currency. Have you noticed how your money, if you take a look at your money, it's more and more colorized? Just like the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso? This merger scheme also calls for a North American currency, possibly called the Amero, to replace the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, and the Mexican peso. This falls in line with the European Union's euro. As we watch the Federal Reserve deliberately depreciate the US dollar, it went down again today as oil went up to over $86 a barrel. As we watch the Fed deliberately depreciate the dollar, it's now in parity with the Canadian dollar. Will a dollar collapse set the stage for creating a North American currency? Will they say, well, gosh darn it, your dollar's only worth 20 cents. Well, hey, we've got the solution because we're the government. We always have the solution. And we're going to give you the Amero. You see, the government creates the problems, then these geniuses come up with the solutions. And it's not the solutions we'd like. Amazingly, and this is great news because these guys are so arrogant and cocky that they're now coming out and talking about all this. Former Mexican President Vicente Fox, in a series of interviews last week on softball talk shows, he's promoting his book. He's a great author, On softball talk shows like Larry King, admitted that he and Bush were pursuing a North American Union and a single currency all these years. He admitted it on Larry King and a couple of other shows, but Katie Couric didn't talk about it. Brian Williams on NBC, anchorman, didn't talk about it. These people read teleprompters. They don't write these scripts, okay? They're very well paid, and they go to their five-star restaurants after they tell you a bunch of lies. And they mostly lie through omission. But Mexican President Fox, I'm going to send him a Christmas card because it's great that he admitted this. Through the Bush administration, the global elites are creating a borderless continental superstate devoted to the lowest possible wages. This merger will allow regional government of unelected bureaucrats and corporate internationalists to harmonize our laws and regulations with Mexico and Canada. And now you know why our immigration laws aren't enforced. And why thousands are allowed, including tonight, to invade our country. Now you know why they're building the 700 miles of double-layered fencing. Why those 2 Border Patrol agents are in prison. Why thousands of illegal aliens are allowed to wave Mexican flags in our streets and so on and so forth. You get the picture. Why our hospitals and schools and jails are allowed to be flooded with people here illegally. Why the government allows thousands of Americans to be murdered, killed, and sexually assaulted by people here illegally, including children.
That's right.
Why cities are allowed to provide sanctuary to illegal aliens. Why our government allows hundreds of our radio stations to be taken over by Spanish language programming. The globalists are paving the way for the North American Union so it is achievable by the year 2010. And let me tell you something. People like David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger and all the rest of them, they've waited their whole lifetimes for this. They might even have been waiting for it when they were children. They're so evil. Their whole lifetimes. They want this real bad. The ends justify the means. They'll do anything. Free trade agreements and an immigration invasion are part of a larger scheme to abolish our independence in favor of a North American Union, one region of a world government. That's why there's a European Union. The goal of the globalists is to create a world monopoly with workers making slave wages. I'm sorry people are leaving because I'm going to show you inspiring photos because we're waking up, folks. I'm going to show you some very inspiring pictures in a minute. But the goal of the globalists is to create a world monopoly with workers making slave wages. We're going to be working in a workers' paradise. There are no borders in the workers' struggle. May 1st, 2007, this is a front page photo in the Los Angeles Times. He marched down Broadway to LA City Hall. All these illegal aliens pushing their strollers. Can you see that? What really fascinated me, because I analyze the media, as you can tell, I have a very exciting life. And this sign here says there are no borders in the workers' struggle. And what I found most intriguing about it was there's an apostrophe after the S in workers. Now that is grammatically correct. Do you think this woman, who probably has less than a 6th grade education, knew that? No. Well, somebody makes the signs for these people. Was it the Ford Foundation through La Raza or Maldev? America is being erased before our very eyes, as Ed had said earlier this evening. So, what can everyday Americans do to stop this treason and evil now that I've ruined your evening and perhaps your week? I do not want you going home and slitting your wrists, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? I don't want you going home and saying, oh, God, it's over. It's not over. Look, Stanford beat USC last week. Okay? You know, look at football and baseball, basketball. You know, I'm sure there are a lot of sports enthusiasts. I'm one. And you think, oh, it's the 9th inning and we're down by 5 runs. We might as well go home, go to the parking lot, turn on the radio. Oh my gosh, my team just won the game. You never give up. And that's what coaches tell players. You never give up. The message throughout my book, Fighting Immigration Anarchy, American Patriots Battle to Save the Nation, is that everyday Americans can make a difference and achieve extraordinary things. I was at this rally. There were about 500 of us from across the country. We spent our money. This is across from the White House, April 22nd of this year, and we said, no amnesty. And I'm sure you all said no amnesty, and hopefully you made phone calls and sent faxes and emails and were mad as hell. Well, guess what? It was defeated. June 28th, and here are the Democrats. There's Ted Kennedy and Chuck Schumer, and the Republicans, and over there is Carlos Gutierrez and Michael Chertoff, and these guys are not happy campers.
No, they weren't.
They thought, oh, the American people, oh, they're all paying attention to Paris Hilton and Britney Spears. They're just dumb. We're dumb, but no, we aren't. On that day, Americans achieved the extraordinary with the miraculous defeat of the treacherous Bush-Kennedy amnesty guest worker bill in the Senate. That was the greatest grassroots uprising in modern politics. Some of these same senators, though, came back in September trying to push the so-called DREAM Act. They were defeated again, and they vowed to come back again. And these guys are never going to come back until we finish this off. American patriots come in different skin colors. This is us, I was telling you, marching down Broadway to LA City Hall. About 150 of us. This was another event at the Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles. This is Jim Gilchrist, head of the Minutemen, or founder. David Hernandez, these are all friends of mine, running for LA mayor, and Ted Hayes, the black man there, who is, you got to get him for a speaker. He's very exciting. And we've had it. We have had it with the invasion in the NAU. Stand our ground. We won't back down. That man there, Mexican heritage there in the middle, he's a member of the Minutemen. So when the media says, oh, we're just a bunch of racist whites, BS. This has nothing to do with skin color and race. Here, some American patriots just a couple of weeks ago, grandfathers and grandmothers. No amnesty effort. Young Americans also. They are smart enough to realize that no border equals no country. This was a picture in Southern California. Here's a great picture here. This was that, remember when I showed you National City Hall, and the Mexicans were on the other side of the street, down near San Diego? Well, we were on this side of the street, okay? Arizona, Georgia, Oklahoma have passed tough state laws cracking down on illegal immigration, and illegals are beginning to leave those states. We are turning the corner, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to get very ugly. 18 state legislatures have introduced resolutions calling on our federal government representatives to halt work on the NAU, and the John Birch Society made this happen. Idaho, Montana, and Oklahoma have passed their resolutions against the NAU. At least 27 U.S. congressmen, including all 3 Republican congressmen running for president, Ron Paul, Tom Tancredo, and Duncan Hunter, have signed on as co-sponsors of a bill which demands that Congress and the president not allow construction of the NAFTA superhighway system or enter into the NAU. We do have some patriots on Capitol Hill. Demand the same from your congressman. Demand that the fence be,
We're in New York.
I live in California. You know, if you laugh about it, we're not going to win.
No.
Okay? Demand that our current U.S. immigration laws be enforced now. Demand an end to anchor baby citizenship. Demand an end to these sanctuary policies. Demand that your local governments pass laws banning illegals from working or renting. If they can't work or live here, they will leave and go back to Mexico or wherever they came from. End chain migration. This was the terrible act passed in 1965. Question every elected official and candidate on the immigration invasion, the superhighways, and the North American Union, and vote out those who refuse to take a pro-borders, pro-immigration law enforcement position, and elect fellow citizens who understand that their primary responsibility is to the citizens of the United States. Tell others what is really going on, okay? Now it is up to you. I spent 2 years researching and writing my book without any pay. And I did this for you. I didn't write this for the elitists. I wrote it for you. It is your job to spread the word. Become like Paul Revere, get on your horse and spread the word about what I've told you tonight. My book reads like an exciting novel. It chronicles the courage, passion, struggle, and dedication of citizen activists fighting for our borders and sovereignty. It is the first book in the country to examine the SPP and the merger in detail. Well-researched, 25 pages of sources. It's an inspiration and playbook for Americans who love our nation and freedoms. Remember that Robert Welch quote at the beginning of my talk. These guys really know what they're talking about. They're very well organized. It is a great organization, great publications. They have been on this for 50 years. They're the best organization, in my opinion, to stop this madness, this treason. My final slide is a picture I took of a man at one of the rallies, and he asked, did they fight for open borders? Here are our brave soldiers raising the flag at Iwo Jima in World War II, and illegals crossing into our country. And I hope I can read this to you without choking up. I received, I've met thousands of people, I guess, over the past couple of years. And I received a letter from a man. I'm just going to read you a couple of sentences. He came to one of my talks in Southern California and bought my book. He said, "Dear Dan, I haven't had the time to read your book thoroughly. What I have read, I think, is outstanding and should have been done a long time ago. I thank you with all of my heart for taking the time to write it. Sincerely, Art Beale, in the United States Navy, retired. He was a prisoner of war in Bataan and Corregidor in World War II. And shortly thereafter, he phoned me, and he said he wanted to buy a box of my books to give to friends to wake them up, and I drove down to his home in Orange County. He's an old guy, he's about 90. And he was mad. He was mad. He was telling me about his experience as a prisoner of war. And he said he wasn't a prisoner of war and didn't fight for our country so that he could watch our elected officials give up our country to Mexico and a new world order. Ladies and gentlemen, the patriotic resistance is growing across America. But time is quickly running out. The globalists are working hard to end our freedom and independence. They want their North American Union by the year 2010. Their objective is power and control. If our freedoms, independence, standard of living, and American way of life are to be preserved, it will be up to us. God bless you and God bless America.